Okay, it's the top of the hour, so let's begin the program. The most important relationship building strategy. And I am David Lee. So before I forget, fear not, no need to rush and scurry around taking notes madly. I'll be giving you handouts later. So my hope is what you'll do, though, is actually take notes based on what ideas come up for you, but not trying to write down the slides. Okay, so where does this idea that this is the most important relationship building skill come from? It actually comes from this really awesome woman, Jane McGonigal. You can see a number of her TED Talks and other presentations on YouTube, and she's famous in the game design world, and it's based on her outstanding book, Super Better, A Revolutionary Approach to Getting Stronger, Happier, Braver, and More Resilient. And she actually has an app, as you can see, and a website called Super Better. And it's based on her experience after having a serious concussion and becoming depressed. That's an unfortunate natural response to the brain injury that happens with concussion. And she ended up using principles of game design to get out of her depression. And she was so impressed with the results, she started thinking about how can I help other people apply gaming principles. And so in her book, here was something that she wrote. This skill, it's taught as the number one most important relationship building skill everywhere, from the U.S. Army, based on the University of Pennsylvania Psychology Department's Master Resilience course, to the halls of matchmaking site eHarmony.com, whose senior research scientists contributed to peer-reviewed studies on the phenomenon. In fact, I went to the Army's website on resilience, and you see this quote, "If resilience had a tagline, it would be other people matter." And they focus on this technique as one of the two most critical or most useful techniques for cultivating relationships and as part of that, building resilience. And it's based on the research by Dr. Shelley Gable. Okay, so the reason why I was so taken by this technique that I'll be sharing with you, there's actually several reasons. One is, one of the things that's really been the focus of my research, my thinking over the last several years, is this issue here. Despite the literally billions of dollars that have been spent globally on employee engagement, why engagement levels are still so dismally low. And in working with managers and all types of organizations, so oftentimes hearing them express frustration that employees don't seem to show initiative. They seem to be more about, what can you do for me versus how can I provide value for you, etc. But then hearing from employees about their experiences where they work, and also being aware of some of my own experiences working with different organizations. And noticing some things that are lacking and in most organizations, that I believe this simple technique can be one of the most powerful antidotes. Even though in Super Better, Kelly McGonigal, or Kelly's her sister, Jane McGonigal, talks about it primarily as just a cultivating relationship tool. So engaging in this technique will make your work relationships work better, improve your ability to retain and engage talent, especially your millennials, and there's a reason for that. And I'll talk briefly about that in a moment. Help you build a more resilient, hey, we're all in this together culture, which is critical in the type of rapidly changing environment we're all dealing with. It'll make all relationships, both personal and professional, more satisfying. So here's the issue that I see related to how this technique can improve your ability to retain and engage talent, especially millennials. Hopefully you can't hear my little dog barking in the background. She's a blind shelter rescue dog who takes her guarding seriously. Okay, so this issue that we'll be talking about in a moment, this technique can help ameliorate, is, I believe, one of the major reasons why engagement levels aren't high, major reason why employees are just not that into their employers and their managers, why they don't seem to care. So why is it that employees are just not that into their employer and manager? And as I share this, think about your own experience as an employee, regardless of whether you're a manager or not. So number one, in many, if not most organizations, most interactions are all business. They're primarily impersonal and transactional and actually stripped of humanity. And people are seen and treated as a tool to get the job done and as a means to meeting our objectives rather than as human beings. And so employees end up feeling like their manager and their employer, they don't really care about them as a human being. And you think about, again, your own experience and how oftentimes you witness this. And to give you an idea of how pathetic it's become, this is a recent white paper by the Aberdeen Group, an incredibly respected research firm, suggesting to employers to reframe employees as humans. Like this is a novel concept, and unfortunately it tends to be that way. That tends to be the norm in most organizations. And so here's a truism that I like to share when I'm working with managers and leaders, is that we tend to care about people who show they care about us. I mean, think about that. And there's a corollary to that, which is and I want you to hear this and think about your own experience of this, when we are careless in our treatment of others, we teach them to care less about us. So let's talk about a powerful and yet simple antidote to this unfortunate phenomenon in the workplace of this transactional, impersonal, people not treated as individual human beings, and therefore their heart and soul aren't in their work. And so the simple technique is called ACR, or active constructive responding. And basically all it is when somebody shares something with you, especially if it's something that they're proud of, they're happy about, something cool that just happened, it's showing enthusiasm, asking questions that encourage them to talk more about it and relive the awesomeness that was the experience, and congratulate and express happiness for them. Now, obviously not all the time are you going to say, well, congratulations, but when it's appropriate. But the key is to share in their happiness, their enthusiasm of the experience. So it's celebrating and reliving the experience with them. So Jay McGonigal writes in Super Better, it sounds simple enough, but studies show that nothing contributes more to the long-term strength and success of relationships than whether its participants do active constructive responding. Couples who did it stayed married longer. Co-workers who do it are happier and more collaborative at work. Highlight that. Family members who do it report feeling closer to each other and experience less anxiety and depression. People who develop this skill, not skills, and practice it regularly have more and stronger friendships. So let me give you an example. Actually, I'll give you both a personal and professional example of the opposite of ACR and then what an ACR response is. And again, this is based on the work of Professor Gable. So passive constructive. So let's say a friend says, hey, my daughter's going to have a baby. Passive constructive is like, oh, that's nice. Good for her. So it's sort of like, whatever. Passive destructive. Babies. My brother and his wife just had twins. You can imagine that's keeping them busy. Here, I've got a few thousand pictures on my phone of them. Let me show you a few of the cutest. So you know people like that. It's like, hey, you've had your 10 seconds of airtime. Now let's talk about me. So that's the passive destructive. But then there's active destructive. Man, is her life going to change? There goes any me time, not to mention sleep. And hey, didn't you say she just turned 40? Because I imagine you're all concerned about the potential for complications. And in fact, I remember just reading that the odds of complication over doubles at that age. blah, 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 blah. So you all know people like that, the sort of Debbie Downer, that any possible negative spin on a situation, that's what they go for. And then active constructive responding. Hey, I bet you're excited. I can see you totally rocking the grandma role. Hey, when's baby arriving? And do they know if it's a boy or a girl? So again, nothing rocket science, just genuine interest and enthusiasm, celebrating with them and asking a question that asks them to share more. And then the interest, enthusiasm, questioning, affirming, exploring continues. So you see what I mean? Now let's talk about a workplace one. So let's say somebody says, hey, so it's a tech, the software development team. Our team finally found and fixed that really hard to find software bug that was driving our customers crazy for months. Passive constructive. Oh, that's nice. So again, just no interest. Basically the door, not, if not shutting, at least not opening to more conversation and more taking in of what they're really interested in. Passive destructive. Well, that's nice, but I'm sorry. That's nice. We're pretty pumped over in sales too. You know, we blew by our sales goal for this quarter. It looks like we're on track for a record year. We might even all be able to go to the big convention in Hawaii next winter. Man, that'd be great. Chilling out by the pool and blah, 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 blah. So again, you know people who do that. And I just want to encourage you to pause for a moment and examine, do you do that at times? I know I'm really tuned into this stuff and I've caught myself doing that. Like I'm so into my version of their experience. I use their sharing as a launching pad for my sharing. Like, dang, didn't mean to do, or maybe I meant to do it, but I shouldn't have done that. Don't do that in the future. So active destructive, hey, good to hear, but what took your team so long to figure it out? I imagine we've lost a lot of customer goodwill because of that. Hope that kind of thing doesn't happen again. That's kind of an extreme, almost a cartoonish version of destructive. But I know you've heard versions of that in the workplace where a person just dwells on a negative interpretation. And then active constructive, man, way to go. What a relief, huh? I bet our customers are going to be psyched to hear that. Hey, how'd they figure it out? So again, you just see the acknowledging, the celebrating, and the asking of questions. So that's ACR. And just a quick FYI, I actually, when I first read in Super Better about the number one practice to building relationships, I was actually surprised because I expected it to be more along the lines of showing support and empathy when somebody's sharing some problem or difficult thing they're going through. But when I looked into Dr. Gabel's research and primary sources, she talked about the research which showed that often if people either seek out support or receive support from others, the embarrassment or I'm less than the other person, all that sort of ego stuff gets in the way of it being as a positive experience as the celebrating positive experiences is. And one of the other points that she made in one of the articles I read was that because more of the interactions in daily life or the things that people share are the good things, that provides more opportunity to strengthen the relationship. But let's move on and look more at a 30,000 foot perspective, or from a 30,000 foot perspective, and look more at the big picture. So we talked about this technique, but let's look at the big picture in terms of relationships and relationships in the workplace. Because you think about it, and this is one of the things I've been really focusing on the last few years and why this technique I wanted to share with you, is because when you think about it, whether it's employee engagement, whether it's customer service, whether it's innovation, any type of improvement you want in the workplace, any type of business result you want, increased sales, it requires great relationships. It requires productive relationships, and those require productive conversations. So anything and everything that you can get better at in fostering better relationships and better conversations not only makes your life easier, but enables you to be far more effective and makes for the workplace to be a much better place to work. So let's take a moment and think about what we just talked about with what active constructive responding does, and then we'll talk about some cousins of it, if you will. And look at these fundamental human desires. So think about, human nature at work, that these aspects of human nature and how they play out in the workplace and then play out in relationships. So we have the desire to feel heard, to have our opinions heard, our point of view heard. We have the desire to feel understood, both what we're saying to be understood. And you know how frustrating it is that no matter how you frame something or phrase it, the other person doesn't get it. So not only the specifics of what we said or say to be understood, but just for us to be understood. The desire to feel seen. You know what it's like, whether it's your partner or best friend, when somebody really gets you and all your idiosyncratic, quirky awesomeness. And what a treat that is, that somebody has put the time and effort into really getting you. We have the fundamental human desire to feel cared about. And back to employees seen as tools or machines or software to get a job done. When we don't feel like who we are, that we're cared for who we are as a human, but just as a means to an end, that's not particularly soul satisfying. And we have a profound need to matter, that what we say matters, our ideas matter, our input matters. And so one of the greatest gifts you can give to others is to show them you see them, you hear them, you understand them, and you care about them. And I've got a picture of the dog in here because if you have a dog, you know what masters dogs are at being 100% present and also beholding your awesomeness. So how can we be more that present and truly receive what others have to offer when they're talking with us, when they're sharing with us? So besides ACR, how else do you communicate to people? Hey, I took in what you said. I care about what you're saying. I care about your experience. I see you. You matter to me. Well, here are a few other simple language patterns. Remember, again, you'll get the handout. When somebody's sharing with you, say, the simple, hey, then what happened? Obviously it shows that you're interested. It encourages them to share more. And then going deeper, what was that like? Now, this is probably the former therapist in me where you say, what did that mean to you? What was that like? How did you feel about that? But those are great questions to help a person go from just the factual part, like this is what happened, this is what happened, this is what happened, to share more of the experiential aspect of what happened, their inner world, their thoughts and their feelings, the meaning that it had to them. And not only does that help you understand more where they're coming from, but it also makes for a much more satisfying conversation because you're connecting human to human. One of the techniques that I love to use, and it's become second nature now, and I encourage managers to use it and people who are facilitating meetings to use it, is to reference what people said earlier in the meeting. So here, to play off what Dana said earlier, so linking what you're saying with what with other people have said. And you think about it when you think about if somebody's done that with you, how it feels good. It's like, oh, that's great. What I said mattered. It registered. It was heard. It was received. Another simple language pattern is just to reference something that somebody had shared with you a while back. Last time we talked, you mentioned, et cetera, et cetera. I just had an interesting example. it was a faux pas followed up by an awesome save. And the faux pas part was I had gotten together with a friend and colleague, and I was sharing something that had happened to me years ago that was very intense. And she not immediately, after a few sentences, jumped in and started sharing a story about a similar experience. And she never brought the conversation back to like, oh, sorry, as you were saying, we just went off on other things. And I noted that it wasn't, if it was somebody else, it might have been really annoying, but I really like and respect this person's, and her story was fascinating. So it's kind of like, well, okay. But the cool thing was, and the thing that really made me have even more respect for her as a human being is the next time we got together, she said, last time you never got a chance to finish your story. And I can't remember if she said because I interrupted. But regardless, the fact that she was thoughtful enough and mindful enough to recognize she did it and to care enough to reconnect about that just really impressed me, because very few people do that. And I share that with you because when we do these types of things that we're talking about here, it doesn't just strengthen relationships and uplift others. It also builds the respect or strengthens the respect that others have for you, because they recognize you as being a person who acts in respectable ways. And you think about people who are constantly bringing the attention back to them or show no interest in what you have to say. You don't have the kind of respect for them that you have for people who are good listeners and do care about what others say. And so another simple language pattern or practice is just to say, hey, I was thinking of you the other day. And so I'm sure there are people you think about throughout the day, something they said that was interesting or was helpful. And rather than just keeping it to yourself, just let them know that you were thinking about them, and then share what it is that you were thinking. And, you think about just that little simple practice lets people know you matter. You matter to me. Now, if this was a live in-person longer workshop, not a 29-minute webinar, we would break up into small groups, and I would ask you to identify best practices, to identify what are some other things that you say that let people know you matter. I care about what you say. I remember what you talk about. But since this isn't, the next best thing is for you to be thinking about this later. And also to practice mindfulness and noticing when other people say things or do things that let you know that they pay attention to what you're saying. And so to add to that, practice being 100% present and into it when people are sharing, and notice the difference. So next steps, and then we'll open it up to if anybody has any questions. So notice we're applying ACR, active constructive responding, and its relatives that I just shared with you would be especially powerful. So maybe you're aware of you don't have a really strong relationship with your direct reports, or maybe there's a team, another department where there could be some relationship building, maybe being more tuned into engaging in conversations with them that are more satisfying. Maybe it's more in your personal life where being a better listener, a more enthusiastic listener would help. So that is the most important relationship building skill according to the research. Now so we are officially ending the my talking part of it, and we've got 5 minutes to go, so I'm getting the mouse over to the questions part. Any questions or best of language patterns that you use to communicate? I heard what you said, I care what you said, I pay attention to what you say, etc. So I'm going to hold off here a moment. Oh, and as I'm waiting for people to type in any questions or best of, I will send, okay, here we go. Cool. We got something coming in. I will send out a link. And what I want to ask of you as a favor, and it's also in order to get the handouts to increase your motivation to do this, is I'll do a super short survey because it really helps getting your feedback about what works, what you liked about this and what you'd like in the future. Okay, we have multiple managers in our department, and there are a few managers who do not use this approach. How would you advise coaching them when demonstrating it yourself isn't enough? Okay, so I might even just simply, a couple things. I might, you can share this webinar with them, number one. You can share in the handout, which will indicate the importance of this. Let's see, what else would be good? One of the most helpful ways of helping people realize the importance of something that they're not doing is to sort of like turn the tables on them, is to ask them to think about how they react when their boss doesn't listen to them, when their boss is, checking emails when they're talking, or interrupts, or talks over them, or maybe here's another thing to do that since I'm really into using stories to make points, is share some stories, share examples with managers of employees telling you how they ended up caring just a little less or maybe a lot less and pleasing their boss or going the extra mile because their boss just doesn't seem to listen to them. So those, off the top of my head, those are a few thoughts for how to deal with that. Thanks for that question. Any other questions or best of practices before we wind up here? Going once, going twice. Okay, so this is not your last chance to ask a question. You can obviously follow up when I send you the email. And again, I really hope that you respond to the short questionnaire, because your input shapes both what comes in the future, both in terms of webinars and articles, as well as how I do these webinars. So thanks for attending, and when you get the link to the recording, feel free to share this with your colleagues, because my hope is that this makes a difference not just with you, but in your whole organization. Obviously, one of the best ways of having that happen is sharing that. So thanks for showing up, and hope to see you at future webinars. Take care.